My husband's body was barely cold when my son-in-law started talking about the lake house. Not to me. To my daughter. In the hallway outside my bedroom, 3 days after we buried Raymond, thinking I was asleep. I wasn't asleep. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch in a week. I was lying in the dark, listening to the particular silence of a house where someone used to breathe and now doesn't, and I heard every word. The property taxes alone are going to crush her, Theo was saying. His voice had that carefully measured quality he used in meetings, I imagined. Reasonable, practical. The voice of a man who had already made up his mind. She can't manage a house this size on Social Security. My daughter's response was too quiet to make out. I pressed my eyes shut. Theo again. Your brother agrees with me. We talked about it this morning. I opened my eyes in the dark. My son. My own son had been on the phone with his brother-in-law, discussing what to do with me, before Raymond had been in the ground a week. My name is Winifred. I am 67 years old. I taught 8th grade English for 31 years, managed the finances of a household with 3 children on 2 modest teachers' salaries, and nursed my husband through 2 cancer treatments without falling apart. I have never in my life needed someone to tell me what I can and cannot manage. But standing in my kitchen the next morning, watching my daughter Leanne avoid my eyes as she made coffee, I realized something had shifted. Something irreversible. I had become, in the space of 7 days, a problem to be solved. I said nothing. I poured my own coffee and sat at the table Raymond and I had bought at an estate sale in 1987, and I thought about the envelope in the back of the filing cabinet in his office. The one I'd found 2 days ago while looking for the life insurance paperwork. The one sealed with masking tape and labeled, in Raymond's careful print, for Winifred only. Please. I had not opened it yet. Some part of me had been waiting, though I couldn't have said for what. That morning, after Leanne left to take the kids to school, I went into Raymond's office, sat down in his chair, and opened it. Inside was a letter, a small key on a paper clip, and a folded property deed. My hands were shaking before I finished the first paragraph. Winnie, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry to leave you with all of this. I know you can handle it. I've always known that better than you know it yourself. But I also know that handling things alone is not the same as having someone in your corner. So consider this letter me, still in your corner. There are a few things I need to tell you that I probably should have told you sooner, but I kept thinking we had more time. We always think we have more time. First, the cabin in Vermont. I stopped reading. The cabin in Vermont. Raymond had inherited a small piece of property from his uncle Earl almost 20 years ago. A modest cabin near a lake outside of Woodstock, a place we'd visited twice before the kids were grown, and then somehow never got back to. I had assumed hazily that we still owned it. I had not thought about it concretely in years. I kept reading. I've been maintaining it quietly. The property management company sends me annual reports. I'll put their contact information at the bottom of this letter. The place is small, but it's fully paid for, and Uncle Earl left it to me in a trust that passes directly to you. The kids were never named in that trust. I want to be clear about that. It is yours. There's a neighbor up there, a woman named Harriet. Wait, I nearly laughed. Not Harriet. Raymond would have written Harriet because that was his Uncle Earl's nearest neighbor's actual name. Some woman who'd watched out for the property for decades. A woman I'd never met. Raymond was like that. Specific. Careful. I turned back to the letter. Her name is Alice. She's been checking on the cabin every few weeks. And she knows to expect your call if anything happens to me. She's good people, Winnie. You'll like her. Now, about money. The letter laid it out plainly. Raymond had been more careful with our savings than I'd fully understood. His pension from the school district, my pension, Social Security for both of us. Combined, more than enough to maintain our house comfortably. He'd also, over the past 15 years, quietly contributed to an investment account in my name alone. Index funds. Nothing complicated, just steady contributions that had grown into something substantial. He listed the account number, the balance. I had to read the number 3 times. I know you're probably furious with me for not telling you sooner, the letter continued. And you're right to be. But Winnie, I've watched the kids for a long time. I love them. You love them. But they've learned, especially since the rough years when we helped Theo and Leanne with the down payment on their house and covered Marcus's bar exam fees. They've learned that our resources are available on request. I didn't want our retirement to become another request they felt entitled to make. The money is yours. The cabin is yours. Do with them what you want. Whatever brings you peace. All my love. Raimondi folded the letter and sat very still in his chair for a long time. Outside, a car drove past. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere upstairs, the house settled. I thought about Theo's voice in the hallway. She can't manage a house this size. I thought about my son Marcus, who I had not heard from since the funeral reception, calling his brother-in-law before he called me. I thought about the cabin in Vermont, sitting quietly on its lake, waiting. 2 days later, I drove to see my attorney. Her name is Janet Park. I've known her since she handled our wills 15 years ago. And she is not a woman who wastes words. She spread Raymond's documents across her desk, read everything carefully, and then looked up at me over her reading glasses. Your husband was thorough, she said. He taught high school chemistry for 28 years, I told her. He liked his variables controlled. Janet almost smiled. The Vermont property is yours outright through the trust. No probate required. No one can contest it. She set down the deed. As for the investment account, also solely in your name. The estate is straightforward. Everything transfers to you. My son-in-law has been making noises about selling my house. She looked at me steadily. He has no legal standing to do that. The house is in your name. Nothing can happen without your signature. He doesn't know that yet. Would you like to keep it that way for now? I thought about that. Yes, I said, for a little while. On the drive home, Leanne called. I answered on the Bluetooth. Mom, we should all sit down together this weekend. Theo has some ideas he wants to walk you through. Ideas about what? A brief pause. Just about your situation going forward. He's been doing some research. He's trying to help, Mom. We all are. I watched the highway stretch ahead of me. That's thoughtful, I said. Tell him I look forward to hearing his ideas. I called Marcus that evening. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding slightly caught off guard, as if he'd expected me to be someone else. Hey, Mom, how are you holding up? I'm managing, I said. I wanted to ask you something directly, Marcus. Have you been talking to Theo about what to do with my house? Silence. The particular silence of a person recalibrating. We were just brainstorming, he said finally. We were worried about you, worried about me, or worried about the asset. Mom, that's not fair. I kept my voice level. You haven't called me once since the reception. You called my brother-in-law before you called your own mother. I think fairness is a complicated word right now. Another silence. I didn't think about it that way. I know you didn't. I paused. I'll be at Leanne's on Saturday. We can talk then. I spent the days before Saturday moving quietly through my house, touching things, thinking. I called Alice in Vermont. She had a warm, unhurried voice, the kind that comes from years of living somewhere quiet. Your husband talked about you every time he came up, she said. He'd come for a long weekend every couple of years to check on the place. Always brought a book and a case of decent coffee. He'd say, Alice, my wife would love it up here. I keep meaning to bring her. She paused. I'm real sorry you're coming under these circumstances. What's it like this time of year? October? Beautiful. The foliage is still going. The lake's quiet. Had a family of loons this summer, but they've moved on. I asked her about the cabin's condition. She walked me through it matter-of-factly. Roof redone in 2021. Small kitchen, 1 bedroom, a sleeping loft. A wood stove that threw good heat. A screen porch facing the water. You're welcome anytime, she said. I've got a key, but there's also one under the geranium pot on the left side of the door. Raymond told me to tell you that specifically. Said you'd know which pot he meant. The geranium pot. We'd brought it up from a garden center in Woodstock on our second visit. years ago, laughing because it was an absurd thing to haul in a rental car. Raymond had found it funny for years afterward. A private joke that had outlasted the joke. I pressed my hand to my mouth for a moment. "I'll be in touch," I told Alice. Soon. Saturday came overcast and cold. I drove to Leanne and Theo's house with a coffee cake I'd made that morning, the same one I'd been making for 30 years. Old habit. The kind that persists even when everything else is upended. Leanne met me at the door. She looked tired, and behind the tiredness I saw something else. A careful watchfulness, like someone waiting to see which way a situation breaks. Marcus was already there, sitting in the living room with his hands around a mug. He stood when I came in and hugged me, and the hug was genuine. Whatever else was complicated between us. Theo came in from the kitchen, carrying a folder. I recognized the move, the folder. The deliberate signal of preparation, of having done the homework, of being the adult in the room who had figured things out for everyone. I'd seen it in parent-teacher conferences for decades. It never meant what the person holding it thought it meant. "Lorraine," Theo began, "and I need to stop here, because that is not my name. My name is Winifred. And Theo has called me Lorraine exactly once before in 13 years of marriage to my daughter. At a party where he'd had too much to drink. Today, he was perfectly sober. He just didn't think it mattered enough to get right. I let it pass. He spread papers on the coffee table. There were printouts, Zillow listings, I realized. Houses. Smaller houses. One was a 55 and older community in a town 40s from here. "We've been looking at some options," Theo said. "The house is probably worth around $450 in the current market. If you sold, after fees you'd be looking at maybe $400,000, which combined with Raymond's pension gives you a really comfortable cushion." "Raymond's pension," I said, "is not yours to factor into anything." Theo looked up. "I just meant, I understand what you meant." I set down my coffee cake on the side table. "Tell me something, Theo. When did you and Marcus start having these conversations?" Marcus shifted in his chair. "We were concerned," Leanne said quickly. "I understand that. I'm asking when." I looked between them. "Because the last time I spoke to any of you individually was at the reception. Raymond was buried 11 days ago. 11 days. And somehow by day 3, you were already researching my real estate options." The room got very quiet. "Mom," Marcus said, "we didn't mean. What did you mean then? Help me understand." My voice was calm. I had taught 8th graders for 3 decades. I knew how to hold a room without raising my voice. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the two of you spent the first week of my widowhood, not asking how I was sleeping or eating or getting through the days, but calculating what my house is worth. Leanne's eyes had filled. "That's not fair, Mom," Leanne. I looked at my daughter directly. "Do you know what Raymond's pension actually pays per month?" She shook her head. "Do you know whether there's a mortgage on the house?" Another head shake. "There isn't," I said. "We paid it off 6 years ago. Do you know that?" By the expression on her face, she hadn't known. I watched her register it, then watched her glance sideways at Theo, who was looking at his folder. "He told you it wasn't sustainable," I said. "He didn't actually know." "I was trying to help," Theo said. His voice had gone flat. "I know you were. That's what makes it hard." I picked up one of the Zillow printouts, looked at it for a moment, set it back down. "But here's what I need you to understand. My house is not a problem to be solved. I am not a problem to be solved. I am a 67-year-old woman who just lost her husband of 41 years, and I am fully capable of deciding what happens next in my own life." Marcus was staring at the floor. "We should have called more," he said quietly. "I should have." "Yes," I said. "You should have." Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Theo said, "So what are you planning to do?" I almost smiled at the shape of the question, still trying to assess, still trying to understand the asset situation. But there was also something else in his face now. Something less certain. "I'm going to live my life," I said, "whatever that looks like." I left Leanne's house that afternoon with the coffee cake untouched on the table. I drove home and I sat in Raymond's office, in his chair, for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and booked a one-way train ticket to Woodstock, Vermont, departing Wednesday. I called Alice that evening. "I'll be there Thursday morning," I told her. "Is that all right?" "The coffee pot's already out," she said. The train ride was 5 hours. I sat by the window with a novel I didn't read, watching New England ease into view. The rocky outcrops, the birches going gold, the small towns flashing past like glimpses of another life. I had my phone turned to silent in my bag. I knew there were messages. I didn't look. At the station in White River Junction, I rented a car and drove the last 40 minutes through hills that were burning orange and deep red, the kind of October color that feels almost aggressive in its beauty, like nature trying to make a point. The cabin was at the end of a gravel road that curved through a stand of maples. I almost missed the turn. Then I saw it, a small dark shingled building with a screened porch and a dock running out over still water, and on the porch, a ceramic pot with the last ragged geranium of the season. I sat in the car for a moment with the engine off. 41 years, we should have come back sooner. The key was exactly where Alice had said it would be. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and old pine, and something faintly citrusy that I couldn't identify. It was clean, small. You could see the whole of it from the door. The kitchen with its copper-bottomed pots, the sitting area with a wood stove and 2 deep chairs, the narrow stair rising to the sleeping loft. One window in the kitchen framed the lake perfectly, as if whoever built it had known. On the kitchen table was a note in neat handwriting. "Welcome home. Soup in the fridge. Just heat it up. Call if you need anything." Alice, I stood in the middle of the cabin and felt something I hadn't felt since before Raymond got sick the second time. Something I didn't have a word for, but which lived somewhere in the chest, warm and quiet. I put my bag down. I heated the soup. I sat at the kitchen table and watched the afternoon light move across the water, and I didn't do anything else for a very long time. That evening, Alice knocked. She was a tall woman in her early 70s with white hair cut short and the kind of unhurried warmth that comes from living someplace beautiful for a long time. She brought a bottle of local cider and pulled up a chair on the porch without being asked, and we sat wrapped in blankets watching the last light go pink on the lake. "Raymond came up about 2 years ago," she said. "Stayed 4 days. He spent most of the first day just sitting out here." She nodded toward the water. I asked him if he was all right. He said he was fine. He was just thinking about his wife and whether she'd be okay when he was gone. I looked at the lake. He was always 10 steps ahead of everyone. "He talked about you a lot. The way you handled things," he said. "I'm going to try to get this right," he said. "Alice, Winnie thinks I'm the steady one. She's completely wrong about that. She's the one who holds everything together. She just does it so quietly nobody notices, including her." Alice paused. "I thought you should know he said that." I didn't trust my voice, so I didn't use it for a moment. "He was right about one thing," I finally said. "I do things quietly. Maybe it's time to do something a little louder." 3 days into my Vermont stay, my phone rang with Marcus's name on the screen. I was on the dock, a cup of coffee going cold beside me, watching a great blue heron stand motionless in the shallows on the far bank. I answered. "Mom." He sounded different from Saturday. Something in his voice had shifted, the performance of concern gone, replaced by something rawer. "Where are you? Leanne said you'd gone. Somewhere, Vermont." A pause. "Vermont? Why?" "Because your father left me a cabin here, and I've never actually spent real time in it." Long silence. "I didn't know about a cabin, no, you didn't." I watched the heron. "Marcus, can I ask you something without it turning into a fight?" "Yeah. When you and Theo were making your plans for my house, what were you actually hoping for?" "Not the polite version, the real version." Another silence. This one different. The silence of a person actually thinking rather than calculating. "I don't know," he said at last. I panicked. I didn't know how to show up for you after Dad died, so I turned it into a project, something to manage. Something I could control." His voice roughened. "That's a terrible answer." "It's an honest one," I said. "That's worth something. I haven't asked you once how you're doing. Not really, no. How are you doing? I looked at the heron, the perfectly still water, the maple hillside burning orange on the far shore. I'm doing better than I expected, I said. I'm sitting on a dock in Vermont watching a heron, and yesterday I found a used bookshop in town that had 3 novels I've wanted to read for years, and Alice next door made pie and taught me to play cribbage. I am, genuinely, okay. I could hear him exhale. That sounds like you. Does it? The books part, yeah. We stayed on the phone for almost an hour. He told me things he hadn't said at the funeral, or since, about how scared he'd been during Raymond's second treatment, how guilty he felt about not visiting more in those last months, how he'd turned the anxiety sideways into practicality because he didn't know what else to do with it. I listened. I told him I understood that, even if the outcome had hurt. Before we hung up, he said, I'd like to come see you. Not to talk about the house, just to see you. Come to Vermont, I said. I'll be here a while. What I did not tell Marcus, not yet, was how long a while might be. I had begun to suspect, sitting on that dock in the evenings, that it might be a very long while indeed. Leanne called 4 days after that. It was a more complicated call. Theo feels like you humiliated him, she said, when we'd gotten past the preliminaries. I see. I'm not saying he was right about everything. I'm just telling you how he feels. What about how I feel, Leanne? Has he asked? Quiet. Then, he's not good at that. I know he isn't. I've known that for 13 years. I walked to the window. The lake was steel gray in the overcast morning, beautiful in a different way than it was in sun. Leanne, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Were you on board with the plan to sell my house? Your actual opinion, not Theo's. A very long pause. I thought it made sense logistically, she said at last. That's not what I asked. Another pause. No, she said quietly. I wasn't comfortable with it. I thought it was too fast. But he'd already talked to Marcus, and I felt like I was the only one who wasn't sure, and I went along. There it was, the shape of it, finally clear. You're allowed to disagree with your husband, I said, especially when it concerns your mother. I know. Her voice was small. I'm sorry, Mom. I know you are. We talked for a long time after that, longer than we had in years, I think, about Raymond, about the early years when the kids were small, about the fact that Leanne had wanted to be a landscape architect and had quietly given it up because the practical path seemed safer, and how I'd always wondered if that was the right choice, and how she'd never asked me what I thought. Why didn't you ever say anything? She asked. Because you didn't ask, and I was trying to respect your autonomy. I paused. Apparently, we're both bad at saying things directly. She laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of her. Yeah, we kind of are. Something to work on, I said. Both of us. The foliage peaked and began to thin. I joined Alice's morning walking group, 5 women between 65 and 80, who met at 7 a.m. at the bottom of the road and walked 2 miles regardless of weather, talking the entire time. I found the used bookshop owner was also in a weekly discussion group that met at the library, and I started going. I cooked in the small kitchen and learned its rhythms. I wrote in the mornings, just a journal at first, then longer pieces, an attempt to articulate what it felt like to have a marriage end and a self re-emerge simultaneously. Marcus came for a long weekend. He slept in the loft and complained about the mattress and hiked with me and Alice along the lake path and ate everything I put in front of him. On his last evening, he sat on the porch with a beer and said, almost to himself, Dad knew you needed this place, didn't he? Yes, I said. He knew. He was better at knowing things than he let on. He was, in a lot of ways. Marcus looked at the water for a while. Theo's been. He's felt bad, I think, in his way. He's not going to say it directly because he never does, but he's backed off completely. Leanne says he hasn't mentioned the house since. Good. Are you going to sell it? Marquez asked. The house at home? No, I said immediately. No, I'm keeping it. I'll go back periodically. But Vermont is. I searched for the right word. Vermont is where I can think. He nodded, like that made sense to him, even if the logistics didn't quite add up yet. He's always been better at accepting things he doesn't fully understand than his sister is. Leanne needs the whole blueprint. Marcus is okay with partial information. Raymond was the same way. I thought about that sometimes. How much of them I could see Raymond in, and how different it felt from the way it had felt a month ago. Less like grief, more like continuity. November arrived. I flew home for Thanksgiving. Leanne hosted, and I showed up with pies and the particular confidence of a woman who has had 6 weeks of mornings on her own dock and is no longer interested in shrinking to fit the available space. Theo was polite. Carefully, formally polite, the way people are when they know they overstepped and have decided that good behavior is the appropriate response. He called me Winifred correctly. Both times he spoke to me directly. Small thing, it mattered. At the table, my granddaughter, Leanne and Theo's oldest, who is 16 and pays attention to more than adults realize, watched me through dinner with an expression I couldn't read. After the dishes were done, she found me alone in the kitchen. "Grandma," she said, "where were you this fall?" I told her about the cabin. Her eyes went wide. "You just went? By yourself?" "By myself." She thought about this. Was it scary? At first. Then no. I handed her a leftover dish to wrap. The scary part was only at the beginning. Once I got there, it felt like the most natural thing I'd done in years. She was quiet for a moment. "Mom said you and Grandpa never went back there after we were little. We kept meaning to. That's sad, a little. But also, I went. Just me. And that turned out to matter in ways I didn't expect." She looked at me for a moment, with that particular teenage directness that hasn't yet learned to veil itself. "You seem different," she said. "Good different, like you take up more space." I laughed at that. That might be the best thing anyone said to me in years. I drove back to Vermont 2 days after Thanksgiving. The house in Ohio sits under the care of a property management company now, maintained and ready when I want it. Marcus has been up to visit twice. Alice and I take our morning walks. I've joined a pottery class at a studio in town because Alice said I had the hands for it, which is probably not true. But the process of being a beginner at something is its own education. I've written 40 pages of what might become a memoir and might become nothing. But either way, the writing has done what writing always does: clarified things. One evening in early December, I was sitting by the wood stove with a novel when Leanne called. She didn't call about anything specific. She called to tell me about a funny thing that happened at work, a small, ordinary story, the kind of call you make to your mother not because you need something, but because she's your mother, and the thing was funny and you wanted to tell her. We talked for 45 minutes. Before we hung up, she said, "I'm glad you went to Vermont." "So am I." "And Mom?" "The pottery thing Alice mentioned." A pause. "I think that's kind of wonderful." I looked around the small cabin, the copper pots on their hooks. Raymond's photograph on the windowsill, the 40 pages in a stack on the desk, the lake outside, black now under a moonless sky, the ice just beginning to edge the shallows. I had lost the life I expected. I had found the life I was supposed to have always been living. There is grief in that, still, some mornings. There is also something that I am slowly learning to call joy. Outside, the first real snow of winter was beginning to fall on Raymond's lake. I didn't go inside. I stood on the porch and watched it come down, and I felt, for the first time in as long as I could remember, entirely like myself.